Welcome, everybody. We are so pleased to have you with us. My name is Bridget Kustin. I am an anthropologist at the Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford, via Los Angeles, via Baltimore, and I'm here to moderate from Her-cession to a just economy, which is part of Systems Week 2021. Use that hashtag on social media. And we are going to be looking at how the COVID pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities in the workplace, the home, the community, and more importantly, what should be done about that, not just in the realm of tools available to us right now, but also thinking aspirationally, thinking about how to change the structures that have led us to a place of unsustainable inequity. Systems Week is brought to you by the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship here at the Business School and the Center for Knowledge Equity, which is one of the most subversive ideas out there. Academics should hate it because it's saying that credentials are not the only thing that matters. The traditional gatekeeping institutions of higher education should not be the only form of valid expertise. So all of us with PhDs are implicitly being critiqued by these concepts, which is exactly what should be happening. This is a global convening of systems thinkers to reimagine more equitable systems and how to teach, learn, support, and measure systems change. There's 4 main themes, and you can pick up on any of these via recordings that exist or events to come. Those are the global, that is the, climate, economic, health, and social resets. And the main point here is systems. None of us are interested in straightforward causes and easy solutions. We're interested in the broader systems that structure our reality and what we even think of as being possible. We are recording this session. It can be available for later viewing on the Skoll Center's YouTube channel, so do feel free to share this link. And with that, I will turn it over in alphabetical order to our panelists. Each panelist, if you could introduce yourself, take a few minutes to describe what you're doing, aware of this dual register that we're all interested in, which is tools for the present, interests in the present day, but also the aspirational systems change, structural change that all of you are interested in. Let's start with you, Abby.
Thank you so much, Bridget, for the opportunity to be part of this panel with you all today. So my name's Abby Adams-Prassl. I'm an associate professor in economics at the University of Oxford. And also between September through to February this year, I was a specialist advisor to the UK Parliament Women and Equality Select Committee, specifically focusing on the gendered economic impact of the recession following the pandemic. And the reason I have been involved in policy in this way is starting back last March, I co-founded the COVID Inequality Project alongside colleagues at the University of Cambridge and the University of Zurich, in order to try and provide kind of timely insights on how the pandemic was affecting the labour market, with a particular lens on inequality. Now, one of the things that came out really early in our work was this fact that women have been more exposed to the economic fallout from the pandemic across a range of countries, although the precise way in which that kind of manifests itself in unemployment or kind of earnings inequality has obviously been mediated by the types of policies that different governments have put in place. Now, my understanding was that I'd have kind of 5 minutes to just give a kind of brief overview of the main points that I wanted to bring to this panel. So, I mean, there are 3 points I just wanted to make in this kind of opening statement. So first is obviously that women have been more exposed to the economic shock than men, particularly women of colour. The second point I want to make is that gender neutral policy is not enough to actually kind of get to a kind of a just and inclusive recovery. And I'd also just like to kind of underline the real crucial need for us to think about investments in care and also green investments as a very high return economic investments with key market failures kind of justifying kind of aggressive policy and systems level response. So very briefly first on the nature of the shock. Now, long-standing inequalities and occupational segregation mean that women have been more exposed to the recession, given that from the first part, social distancing has had a disproportionate impact on lower paid service sectors, and also firms have been more likely to protect, less likely to protect workers on atypical and temporary contracts, which are disproportionately held by women, particularly women of colour in industrialised economies. Now, on top of this, of course, the disruption in childcare has led to a big widening of the gender gap in overall childcare hours between mothers and fathers. And we've seen that where short-time work policies have been in place, mothers have been much more likely to, if you take a mother and a father in exactly the same type of job, mothers have been much more likely to actually request to be put on short-time leave, to kind of help this, reflecting this kind of difficulty of balancing work and care. Point two is this point that policy has skewed male, at least in the UK and the US, which is where I know best, and this point that gender neutral policy is not enough. So 40% only 40% of countries that have been monitored by the UN's COVID-19 gender response tracker had specific measures in place to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on women's labor, on women's economic security. And I think you can really see how stark the situation is in a country like the US, which hasn't had a national short-time work scheme. So 500,000 more women than men dropped out of the labour force since February last year. And this has really been driven by particularly negative impacts on Black and Hispanic women, whose labour force participation has both dropped by over 4 percentage points, which, okay, you might say 4 percentage points, what's that? That's huge when you think about the kind of normal types of movements that we see in labour market aggregates. And there's a lot of issues that, of course, that are kind of underlying that kind of stark inequality that we've seen there. But something which I think is very different between this recession to others is, of course, this interaction between the paid labour market and domestic and care and unpaid care at home. And I found the lack of political acknowledgement of the childcare crisis absolutely staggering. So you really can't understand gender inequality in the labour market without acknowledging inequality in caregiving within the home. There's a huge and very long literature, academic and otherwise, which kind of underlines that point. However, childcare, okay, I know the UK context best because that's where I've been kind of focusing a lot of my policy attention. Despite this, childcare was rarely mentioned, if ever, in economic speeches, nor given targeted financial assistance. And in oral evidence, the UK government ministers actually justified their position by arguing that, nightclubs actually have also faced falls in demand. So we're not giving targeted assistance to childcare because, nightclubs have been affected worse in terms of demand, which just kind of completely misses the point in terms of thinking about the economic value of these care of the care sector in general, and the fact that it often gets thought of not as a vital piece of public infrastructure like roads or public transport, when really this is how we should be thinking of care. So this rhetoric of kind of economic recovery continues to remain build, despite actually these huge this huge value that the sector has to a wide variety of people, both in terms of facilitating women to work, but also if you look disproportionately at the composition of the workforce being disproportionately kind of women and women of colour, there are also there's also an inclusive point there. My last point, just because slightly tangentially, is about the green, using this, if you like, this economic reset as actually a chance to make good on the large amount of noise that we've heard from world leaders recently about committing to net zero. So China committing to net zero by 2060, of course the US by 2050. Now's the time to make good. So again, we've got a huge amount of evidence that recessions are the times when you want to make these kind of investments, which then sets the terms for the recovery. If you look at actually the types of investments that have been committed to in terms of recovery spending, there's been a lot more rhetoric than actual movement in terms of ensuring that this is a green, inclusive economy. So that's the final point, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Abby, one clarification question. With your work on policy, where do you sense there being easiest room for movement and what feels perhaps most unattainable, right? Is there something that there's a coalescing around, but then there's something that feels truly subversive?
Oh, that is a great question. When I think about points of movement, there has actually been quite a lot of movement in terms of the design of, we think of short time of these kind of emergency policies. So trying to think about kind of these like kind of short-term temporary things, which anyway are going to end in September. So in terms of how we think about the interaction between school closures and, you know, whether women get support or not. I think one of the things which have been, to be honest, relatively frustrating in my opinion, is things which require, as you say, kind of systems level thinking backed up by actual budgets. There has been much less movement on, and there's been a lot of resistance to really thinking about care as a piece of economic infrastructure. And I think part of that is around image, to be honest, that care isn't really thought of as like an economic value creator, whereas actually, you know, if you anyway, I think there's a lot of evidence that it is. And again, and also it's just because these things cost money. But that's a great question, which I will ponder on while everyone else is talking and come back to you.
Well, I'm paying childcare a lot of money so that I can be here right now. So care costs money and is valuable. Maria, let's turn to you.
Thanks very much. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation, and really the topic is at the center of our work at Oxfam. My name is Maria Jose Moreno. I start with the introduction, and I am Director for Gender Justice of Oxfam International, based in Kenya. And I stress that because I would like to share some examples as well about how this pandemic has affected to women in other continents, in other countries. We work at Oxfam very much to put women's rights at the heart of our work. And in our global strategy, we work on economic justice, climate justice, gender justice, and governance. And the pandemic has, as said before, exacerbated previous inequalities, has put very much in all these systems the inequalities and people well-being, and in particular women, on the line. We, for example, we have been working for more than a decade now on care work, but this pandemic has seen the carelessness of our economic systems, political systems, with people, with women's time, in particular, poor women's time, and with subordinated, discriminated groups. Giving some examples, the pandemic, of course, has exacerbated a lot more the inequality and gaps between men and women in care, but it is poor women and women with no access to social services who have suffered that the most. No? And we can see that, for example, in the case in access as well to healthcare in Africa, for example, the maternal mortality has been increased because of lack of access to social security, to health, and in particular, this of course discriminate women and women in poverty. We have seen as well an increase of the drop-off school, and this in previous pandemics have been as well mainly girls, the ones who drop off school, risk early marriage, and have more difficulty to join the school again. We are seeing in some areas and in some countries an increase in early marriage of girls linked to the poverty produced by the pandemic. And all this is a lack of, and reflects a lack of care in our economic and social systems, and as well a big inequalities, intersectional inequalities, when we look at issues such as race, class, gender. No? We have seen in the professions of care as well the poor conditions in which people work, and we the numbers have emerged. 70% of people working in the care sector are women, and a lot of them are in conditions that are very difficult, either of informality, precariousness, etc. But in the case, for example, of domestic workers, 80% are women and 90% don't have access to benefits, you know? And only half of them even benefit from minimum wages. We, looking at all this, we thought that we need to build back but better, as this has been the motto during this time, but not, we need a transformation in our systems, because going back where we were, it is to leave a lot of people in precarity and in exclusion. This is as well very much, the situation is very concerning as well, because women rights organizations that have been the engine of a lot of progress in gender equality have been very affected by the pandemic. Oxfam did a survey, a rapid survey to more than 200 organizations across the world, and 9% had to reduce, 9% were facing closure, and 33% had to reduce staff. This affects our living together, our democracies, and affect gender equality. In many countries as well, the pandemic has translated into more pressure and more violence against activists from social and women organizations and climate organizations. And this again is a very, very concerning issue, because we cannot do the changes we need if women voices and women organizations are not there. And in that sense, our proposal now is a feminist economic transformation that look at intersectionality, that look at, and bring the voices that from the margins in order to guide the changes, and that center care, and care not only in the sense of hands-on care, that of course need to be there to transform unpaid care work and paid work. We need a full transformation, but beyond, we need a transformation of systems that is caring for people through infrastructure, through policies, and to the planet as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And one question for you. You know, one of the systems that Oxfam is embedded in is international development, international aid. What would you say in this COVID era are some of the emerging fault lines between what donors, particularly donors from the global north, want or require versus what women's organizations who are in recipient countries, particularly in the global south, might need, because your own industry is in the midst of its own reckoning as well. So how does the systems change that you're talking about fit into this broader questioning of donor and recipient, global north and global south?
Yes, thanks very much for that question. Yes, indeed, that is, we are going through a process of rethinking ourselves, and that goes for the development sector. And I think that because if we consider that we are in systems, the movement and change of one system change the other. What we have seen is that the Black Lives Matter movement that reminded us very strongly last year the need to decolonize development, the need to decolonize our organization, the need to measure what we treasure, and see what are the diversity of our organizations, what are the targets, what are the policies, what are our commitments to equality in care, what are our policies in parental leave, what are our policies in global equality in these international organizations. And in Oxfam, and I think in similar ways in other organizations that I know, this has taken centrality, as a centrality that was not fully there with before, no? And regarding the relationship and the attention from donors, I think this issue has been there as well, no? What are you doing internally? What are your ways of working? How do we care about the results, but as well about the path? But I have to say as well, and put the attention, bring back the attention to the issue that women's rights organizations have been severely underfunded during this period, no? And and that is as well a call, requires a call of attention to donors. In this moment, that is a critical juncture. This is very important, because not having women's rights organizations, feminist organizations that historically have led the world thinking about ways of working, about participatory democracy, about intersectionality. If we don't have that, we risk a backlash that becomes chronic.
Thank you so much. Let's hear now from Nicole.
So I'm really excited to be here and a part of this conversation. My name is Nicole Mason, and I lead the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, we are based in the US and the country's only think tank committed to winning women's economic equity and building women's power and influence in society. In 2022, at the beginning of 2020, we were celebrating a really critical milestone. Women in the US were 50% of the labor market. And just a few months later, we were in the midst of a global pandemic, and women had lost more than 2 million jobs at that point early on, 4 times the rate of men. And mainly because they were concentrated in sectors such as leisure, hospitality, retail, education, and healthcare services. But what also happened in this moment is that the pandemic exposed a lot of existing social inequality. So many of the women who were struggling before the pandemic heightened those inequalities. So the US had a very fragile social structure, no childcare infrastructure, and also I would call a failing healthcare system. And all those things converged and created a really unfortunate reality for many women of color in particular. And as the pandemic wore on, we really began to understand, again, the burden that women carry as the primary caregivers in their families. We partnered last year on a study on unpaid labor in women and found that women did 30% more of caregiving compared to their male counterparts. For women of color was even more. And during the pandemic, women's caretaking responsibilities increased because school closures and daycare closures. But at the same time, they were still expected to maintain 40-hour-a-week work responsibilities, and it just really proved to be impossible. And so where we find ourselves now is that we are thinking about pivoting from, she-cession, her-cession to a she-covery. And the jobs numbers that we just saw, particularly in the US in April and May, signals that it's going to be a very slow, sluggish recovery. And although we're anxious for the economy to recover, we have to understand, unless we get schools open, get the pandemic under control, and women will not be able to re-enter the workforce in significant numbers. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't believe it's unfortunate that we took really seriously the concerns of, the meaning and significance of women dropping out of the workforce in so many and large numbers. So in the US, our focus was on small businesses and making sure they survived and thrived. We didn't pay too much attention in the beginning to the care infrastructure and the impact of school closures on the economy and women re-entering the workforce. And we didn't actually start paying attention until August of that year, when 865,000 women in the US exited the workforce around August and September, when schools were slated to close. And then there was like an aha moment, like maybe we should be thinking about how we prioritize school and daycare reopening. What I'm really, the pandemic has really been unfortunate and tragic in many ways, but what it has done is really accelerated the conversations that many advocates have been trying to have around systems change, particularly in the US, and I believe even globally. The US spends less than 1% of its gross domestic product family and childcare policies, only above Turkey and Ireland. So this moment has provided us an opportunity because to think about care as a public good rather than a private obligation to families, and really talk about systems change, systems overhaul from issues related to work. What do we mean by work? The future of work, childcare infrastructure, and a healthcare system that works for everyone and that is equitable and accessible. So these conversations have been supercharged, at least in the United States. And what I'm happy to say is that many of the advocates who've been waiting for this moment for for me, it's been 2 decades. For many women who've been doing this work for much longer, we feel like we have the opportunity and moment to really make some really, big systems change.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nicole. Now, as a question for you, as an institution in the US focusing on women's full and equitable participation, the issue that immediately comes up, of course, is an intersectional one, and the fact that feminism, female upliftment in the US has historically been exclusionary and prioritized the needs of white women over the needs of non-white women. And there is a link to a Twitter, a tweet that I found that I really like. I think the link should be somewhere in the chat. I can read it out. By Britt Williams, PhD. Y'all use intersectionality as research parsley. The implication meaning that we sprinkle the term intersectionality. Don't even know what it means, just throwing it on. Now, my question for you is, were we to not engage with intersectionality as research parsley, but to engage with it from a systems level approach, what does that mean for the work of your institution?
Well, I'm sure Brit is not talking to me because I've been doing intersectional scholarship work, activism, and organizing for more than 2 decades. So I'm not sprinkling it around anything instead of using it flippantly. What's been really amazing about this moment, especially in the US, is that women of color, so traditionally many of the organizations that have been at the forefront of change in the US were white women, but I can tell you right now in most of the major US women's organizations and think tanks, they're all led by women of color who, in my opinion, are third wave feminists who came in thinking intersectionally about these issues. So the in the US and the American Families Plan, the Biden administration, those are all policies influenced by women of color and led by women of color. So, I think there are some, people use it flippantly, but in this case, especially with this pandemic and the impact it has had on women of color, having an intersectional framework has been really useful in terms of pointing to strategy solutions that are rooted in people's lived experiences. And I think it's been really helpful for all of us to have it as a framework.
Great, thank you. Stephanie, let's move on to you. And a brief preface to Stephanie, because she is coming at these issues from a very different vantage point, which is having worked with and among the 1%. I will let Stephanie introduce herself.
Thank you, Bridget. Delighted to be here with you all this afternoon. So I'm Stephanie Brobbey. I am a senior associate at Goodman, Derrick, which is a full-service commercial law firm in the heart of the City of London. And I've been a private wealth lawyer for the past decade. And for the benefit of anyone who may not be familiar with private wealth or private client lawyers, the primary role of a private wealth lawyer in the traditional sense, and very much at the elite end of the spectrum, is to safeguard the assets of ultra wealthy individuals, typically defined as people that have access to 30 million plus US dollars. The job of a private wealth lawyer is really to ensure that they facilitate the smooth succession of the assets of wealthy individuals. Typically, those assets might be structured in trusts, maybe a variety of trusts and corporate entities and other interesting entities across the world. And the UK really is a global centre for wealth management, and it attracts international investors as well as serving domestic families. So the private wealth industry is a somewhat obscure part of the economy, but nonetheless very relevant and highly influential, as I'll go on to explain. So as Bridget indicated, the perspective that I bring to this conversation has largely been shaped by observing the industry, the private wealth advisory and wealth management industries over several years, and developing my own critiques of the sector, but also from a client perspective, looking very closely at intergenerational differences in attitudes towards wealth stewardship, the evolving role of philanthropy and growing calls to repurpose wealth that has been accumulated. It's important to bear in mind kind of the wider context of a phenomenon known as the Great Wealth Transfer, which some of you might have heard of. And that in the Great Wealth Transfer, we're seeing the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history. By way of illustration, by 2030, it's estimated that a minimum of $15 trillion will have changed hands from baby boomers to millennials globally. Additionally, there's kind of an emerging number of current and next generation wealth holders who are growing in their consciousness around the dominant economic paradigm and all its flaws and challenges, and really engaging with the need for an economic reset. And in doing so, they are sort of cultivating a desire to embark on a radically different approach to responsible wealth stewardship, and in particular, adopting a systems approach to wealth redistribution. And in the coming months, I'm going to be focusing exclusively on supporting values-driven wealth holders and helping them to push back against the prevailing narratives in what we have today that we call the extractive economy, which tends to comprise excessive wealth accumulation, the infinite growth paradigm, but also more controversially tax minimization. And these wealth holders are embarking or have a desire to embark on using their resources and influence to effect a just transition from an extractive economy to a more regenerative economy. And they want to do this by pursuing radical wealth redistribution, which is both reparative and regenerative in nature. So it's in this context that I consider the world's wealthiest families and their advisors, crucially, must begin to reimagine what legacy and impact mean today in light of the pandemic and other events that have unfolded last year to reveal kind of pre-existing inequities in our society. These families must begin to kind of ask what responsible wealth stewardship looks like in the 21st century, and really to take an active role as we work towards pursuing a just and sustainable economic system that serves both people and the planet. And if they are to succeed in doing so, they must consistently apply an intersectional lens in redirecting capital. And perhaps more importantly, the private wealth industry as a system requires quite a radical change in order to facilitate a just transition. And that's what I'm going to be working on. So I'll hand over back to Bridget now.
Thank you, Stephanie. And it's hard to overstate just how radical a venture and reimagining of private wealth Stephanie is engaging on. A question for you. The theme that we have heard from the previous three speakers is that care work must be centered. It must be understood as a public good, public infrastructure, not as a private good. What role can the world's wealthiest intergenerational families who have money, who have a platform, who are well connected, what role do they play in helping to steer conversations around care work in this right direction?
I mean, I think the number one thing at the moment is, this is a very much an emerging conversation, and a lot of wealth holders, while they're growing in this kind of level of consciousness, which is quite slow, they don't necessarily have the language and understanding around how the system works and how the issues of care and how care is seen in the context of the economy in terms of value. They don't seem to have the understanding and language, and so the number one is really to really educate themselves. It really should be, there's a huge focus in the industry on particularly next generation education when it comes to philanthropy and being responsible stewards and that sort of thing, and it's the sort of thing that really needs to come into conversation as part of family governance and wealth stewardship.
And I'm going to ask you one more question, again, just because you represent such an interesting contrast to the perspectives on the rest of this panel. The other theme throughout the previous three speakers' comments was the importance of money. Money has to be promised, it has to be budgeted, it has to be allocated, paying adequate, recognizing the value of childcare takes money. From your vantage point, helping to steward wealth, set up foundations, direct philanthropic decisions, why is it that women's issues face this pretty persistent deficit in getting the money that they need? What's behind that?
Well, I think the landscape is changing now, particularly with the context of the great wealth transfer, but traditionally, both the capital and the decision-making power of the capital has been very focused on male, on the patriarchs in these wealthy families, and so there hasn't really been, I think, a desire to take an intersectional approach to redirecting capital into funding kind of, for example, grassroots projects focused and led specifically by women. I think it's the perception is perhaps that this is a problem that doesn't exist purely because of who has decision-making power and control over the capital, and I think decisions over capital, whether it's from a family foundation or direct giving, I think there's been a lack of challenge, and in terms of philanthropic practice, there hasn't been space to really reflect on kind of intersectional considerations and the need to kind of fill the deficit, as it were.
Now, it's striking, thank you, Stephanie. Now, it's striking that in this conversation, we have gone from speaking about domestic laborers who cannot access social services to patriarchs of billion-dollar families who have directed, according to their preferences, the philanthropic commitments of those families. And the Her-cession that we're speaking about, and that she spans even the wealth inequality divide. But that leads us to the first question that I want to give to all of you before we start to engage with the comments that are coming in, which is that when we talk about valuing care labor in the way that it needs to be valued, when we talk about ensuring that the Her-cession is not going to occur, does this also require a relinquishing of power from men or a sharing of power? Are we looking at a scenario that is fundamentally additive, whereby women are simply being risen up to the level of men, or are we talking about removing power from those who are currently in power? What are the trade-offs that are going to come if meaningful systems change and a decentering of that which has traditionally been centered is really on the table? Anyone jump in, aware of the fact that you're all approaching this sort of impossibly large question from really different vantage points, from national policy to comparative national policies to an awareness of global women's activist organizations to the inheritors of intergenerational wealth. Very different vantage points, but from where all of you sit, is someone going to have to relinquish or share power?
Well, I can go. Yeah. Well, I think indeed we have to look at power, who take decision making, who is in decision making, who has the resources, and they are expand the perspective from men and women, and again the intersectionality that we were speaking to, these big inequalities in class, migration status, body ability, and look and give care to the people in, considering their needs and considering the right to care and the right to be cared for. If there are men, people in like high net worth individuals that take decisions for all, this possibility of taking that extract decision making and opportunities from many other individuals. And then I think indeed we have to look at how power is distributed, how power is defined, and what do we want to transform. Because, for example, if I take the question, do men have to give up some of their power? The patriarchal model that exists now is as well very negative for men themselves. No, we have like I think around 70% of suicides in the for example in Europe are men. We have that in most countries men have shorter lives. We have that in violence, most of the people killed in the streets, in conflicts and so on, it is men and it is for men. And I think in this, in the system we have, opportunities, well-being, power are redistributed in a way that it is not good for communities, not good for men, and obviously not good for women. No? And I think that if we need to change systems in a way that power itself is redefined, and we put well-being of communities and well-being of people at the center.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Maria just said. I think from my perspective, there are kind of maybe two angles, or kind of two levels at this. Like, on the one, yes, there will inevitably have to be, you know, it's not all a zero-sum game, but there is some element in which, you know, one voice being heard is going to crowd out others. So Caroline Noakes, who's the MP in charge of the Women and Equalities Select Committee, you know, she was laying part of the blame in terms of just how terrible in terms of gender equality policy has been in the UK over the pandemic, from the fact that, you know, if you look at the gender composition of the current cabinet and the decision makers who are in charge, it's like not at all surprising. It's a very, in her words, blokey cabinet, creating quite blokey policies. And so that, you know, if you're going to make that potentially more gender equal, you're going to have a kind of a different set of voices around that table. And if there's only a fixed number of seats, or so be it. But I think that kind of pitting against, like, men and women against one another, or pitting different groups against one another, that does kind of that's not the only part of the story. There's a lot of my work is in empirical economics, on measurement, on thinking about how we can kind of quantify inequality. And what I'd say is that there's a lot of space that exists in terms of improving our current systems of measurement, in terms of making sure that we're actually capturing and publicizing inequalities that exist. And with that measurement and with that kind of bringing to light of these inequalities, you can start to build incentive systems to counteract that. You can start to create policies to address that, which, you know, doesn't necessarily, anyway, so there's kind of, I still think, a lot of space for it not simply to be an adversarial story.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie, Nicole, any thoughts? The status quo is empowering someone and benefiting someone. Does that someone need to change, step down, relinquish power?
So I'm sorry, I was looking for my charger. So, you know, for me, I don't care who has power as long as they're doing the right thing with that power. And unfortunately, men have, in the US, the people in power are not doing the right thing by the people who have less power. So I'm less interested in a question about who has to give up power. I mean, we've had this discussion for a very long time. I think the biggest problem is that the people who are in power, and we've seen it during the pandemic, where there's a broad public support for a set of public policies that would bring about, more equity or create a more just or fair, society. And you have a small group of people who will not pass them. So I don't know if they just need to, die or move out of the way, or, I don't know what's going on, but, the question about sharing power, and power is really very complicated. Very few people are willing to give up power and money. And we see that even when we're trying to, I think workers were in a bit of a labor strike, a very silent labor strike in the United States, where, businesses are trying to get laborers, low-wage workers who've been exploited before the pandemic to come back to these very low-paying jobs, and it's a power struggle, to get them to do that. And so I think I think we can have a different conversation about power, who's in power, who has it. And right now, I do think workers, women, do have a bit more power and are in a position to be negotiating in a different way than I think even before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really important point, as you said, Nicole, that this conversation is not new. And Abby flagged this as well, that the gendered critiques of how GDP is calculated, feminist economics, this has been around for a long time. We're still talking about it. Stephanie, thoughts?
Yeah, just thinking from my perspective in the context of private capital, and I suppose notably philanthropy or the redirection of capital resources otherwise, invariably there is power entrusted to the custodians, the people that are entrusted with the stewardship of wealth, whether it's sitting in a foundation or people have direct access to it. I would say, there is space for sharing power. I think in terms of influence, and when I think about people like Dan Price in the US, who's doing a lot of campaigning in terms of inequality and wealth taxes, and sharing power in that way, and empowering people and communities who are most affected. But I think when it comes down to resources and money and capital, I don't see really how power can be shared. I think at this critical time, when we're trying to rebuild a new economic system, and capital so urgently needs to be allocated directly into the control of communities who've been historically marginalized and underserved by the economic system, that money and power just needs to be handed over.
So that's a bit of a shot across the bow that I would love to hear some of the other panelists respond to, which is to say that when we think of power as being a proxy for money, and the money does accumulate in certain corners, and we know that for a fact, and that money has to be redistributed. We can't get away from just talking about, care value or care labor and how it's valued and how it isn't valued. There is this question of decisions around money and where that money gets allocated. It sounds like, Nicole, there's some positive discussions now with the current US administration, some positive momentum, but how do we keep this from just being contingent on who happens to be in office? Because we were in a very different place a few months back.
Well, for me and for the people I work alongside, it is. I just don't think we can go back. I think people are working to try to push us back and say, let's just get back to normal. But we're not moving. We know that we need a robust social infrastructure. We know that we need a childcare system that works for working women and families. And so it's really difficult to unring that bell. And and we have the public support. You know, there's a lot of tricks. I mean, at least in the US, I don't know what's going on, you know, elsewhere, but, you know, being played in terms of keeping people from participating, you know, and voting and doing all of these things. But you can only push back the change that we believe is inevitable for so long. So for us, it's really about staying the course and getting through some of those policies that we know that will make the difference in the lives of women and families, both at the federal level, but also at the state and local levels.
And Anna, from your vantage point, when you speak about the on-the-ground activists, I mean, again, there's social movements afoot. What does it take to channel that into change? Is it a matter of just staying the course, as Nicole was saying, in your context? Because it sounded more like the course can only be stayed with an infusion of capital, of resources, and those are perhaps precarious or shifting.
Sorry, the question was for me?
Yeah, I guess the question is, would you agree or disagree with Nicole that to a certain extent, staying the course can suffice because there is public momentum? It sounded like from the Oxfam perspective, the public groundswell is precarious because it requires these cash infusions from supporters, and that the money itself is precarious.
Yes, resources indeed are important, but are not the only thing. No? And I agree with Nicole that the economic and health crisis has created an awareness and a momentum that is quite particular. And indeed, that not only for social organizations, but we have seen as well governments to react in ways injecting money to keep people and some companies and services going that before the pandemic was thought that was not possible. But I think that it is important as well. There are a lot of things that go with power, and in that sense, people who have more resources have been able historically as well to shape our imaginations, no? The imagination of what it is economically feasible. It has as well justified historically sexism, and in a way, for example, that a lot of us have interiorized in different ways. And I think at this moment, it is important as well to work together to rethinking the economic system and change the economic imagination. In most business schools, economic schools, show very little diversity of ways of looking at how a society and economy can be organized. We are having at this point, for example, the discussion about the people's vaccine, no? And we are seeing that in some countries now most adults are vaccinated, and in other countries the health and economic crisis is still growing, no? And the discussion about it, I don't think it is only about the resources. The discussion about it is as well about values, about our collective organization, about power distribution, because it is not possible that such important decisions for millions of people are in so few hands, you know? And the quality of our democracies is at stake. You were speaking before about how it depends as well of who is in office, the decisions that are taken, but we see as well how people in office are pushed by businesses, by billionaires in one direction or another, no? And I think in that sense, we are at that critical juncture of rethinking what is possible and rethinking what we want in the sense of that is not just GDP and financial short-term gains that gate decisions and the idea of what is successful and good, but that is equity and inclusion, equality, quality of life, sustainability of the planet, you know? And if we don't have that, it is impossible, even with all the resources, to make a transformation that really improves people's quality of life.
Well, that is a rallying cry if I ever heard one. Thank you. We're going to switch now to questions from the audience, so pop those into the chat. We have a comment from Emmeline Bathurst that I am going to request Stephanie to answer. I am suspicious that an intergenerational wealth transfer can create significant systems change, given that the wealth remains within very specific small communities with certain types of values. Is philanthropy from wealthy millennials aspirational, or is it just moving the problem around? So this is great. It gets to the heart of systems change. Stephanie, what would you say?
Sure, I would say to Emmeline, 100% be suspicious that an intergenerational wealth transfer can create significant systems change. I talk a lot about decentering when I'm talking to wealth holders, decentering the importance of philanthropy, the role of philanthropy in wealth stewardship. So it is not aspirational. I think the reason I mention it is it's not that an intergenerational wealth transfer being the largest wealth transfer in human history from one generation to another, which tends to be more purpose-driven and socially conscious, that won't save us, but it merely provides a moment in time, and it's a catalyst and an invitation towards systems change, specifically within the private wealth industry. We all know that philanthropy is essentially a byproduct of a capitalist system which isn't working for everyone, and it's a system which enables individuals to accumulate wealth to the exclusion of various groups in society. But my hypothesis is that the great wealth transfer provides this opportunity, particularly in the context of the pandemic and the inequalities that have been unveiled over the past 12 months, to really wake up and say that there's got to be a different way of doing facilitating wealth redistribution. And so the focus really, and the framework that I use, is the need for a just transition from an extractive and exploitative economic framework which enables people to accumulate wealth excessively and avoid tax, and to concentrate wealth in the hands of a small number of people, to moving towards a more regenerative economy in which collaboration and cooperation are centered, and there is democratic governance and self-determination. And so I think what I'm saying is that the Great Wealth Transfer offers an opportunity for the redeployment of significant amounts of capital direct really into community wealth building at the heart of it, and to restoring and making good harm that has been caused to people groups, and approaching the issue and the opportunity really for private capital to repair some of the damage that has been caused by excessive accumulation of wealth, by redirecting capital to leaders and activists and movements really that are trying to work towards building a new economic system. So I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. It's very provocative because, billionaires are coming under the microscope, a tarnished reputation at the moment. And it's worthwhile thinking about how, even though, Stephanie, I don't hear you using the buzzwords or phrases of feminist economics or intersectionality in framing the shift that has to happen, as you have, from extractive and exploitative toward regenerative. My anthropological intervention would be that this in and of itself is a feminist economic standpoint, to the extent that care work is regenerative work. Reproductive labor is, by its definition, regenerative. And this is very different forms of valuation around types of labor. So, without putting words in your mouth, could it be said that the ethos framing what you're doing is an ethos that is more resonant with what the other speakers are working toward than might appear at first blush?
Yes, I think it's about reshaping the landscape in order to facilitate, the value that's placed on, rightfully placed on women and care work, which essentially facilitates all the other activity in the economy, as well as being kind of inherently regenerative.
Great. Now, 2 questions for all the speakers, and I invite each of you to answer in turn. The first is, we live in an era where the language that we use is rapidly shifting from pronouns to preferred forms of self-identification. Language right now is receiving rightfully a lot of attention. Performativity talks about the ability, or this is an academic concept that speaks about how the words that we use can create the world that we inhabit and what we can literally see or not see. So language matters. What are the grammars that need to be revised? What are the words that count? What are the words that need to be retired? Everyone has referenced care work. Is there a grammar that can help create this world that we want to live in? Big question, toggling the theoretical and the practical. Are there certain words or concepts that are no longer fit for purpose?
Well, I'm gonna say, and this isn't for me, but I agree with it. The word allyship, which is overused. So people, I'm an ally, I stand with you, but that it's a very passive thing. And so when we're talking about systems change, and we also talk about people benefiting from systems because of their race, their race, their gender, their sexuality, I'm benefiting from a system, but still calling themselves an ally, but not actively working to dismantle those systems, is problematic. And so, and it's a very safe word. So ally, I want to be your ally. And, I think that we can find a better way to be in solidarity and really stand shoulder to shoulder as we think about how do we really undo these systems that are very complicated, very entrenched, intergenerational. So that is just one word that I think is overused, that we might consider replacing with something else that I don't know right now, but maybe that word.
That's great. And I think you're generous in saying it's overused because it's dangerous. And you said it, I'm benefiting from a system, but I'm not working to actively dismantle those systems. There's no risk in being an ally. Nothing's being given up. As you said, it's passive. That's a great one. Any other words that, actually, now I think I really like this question. Any other words that just bother you in your line of work that you think subtly or even explicitly help to shore up the problematic status quo? Or maybe that just bother you?
This might seem a little kind of narrow, but at least a lot of the work that I do is about labour market policy and is trying to understand how these kind of the changes in the organisation of work now and that we expect to see in the future are going to affect patterns of inequality. And one of the dominant words here is that of flexibility. So if you think about how, for example, the gig economy is portrayed, or in the UK we have this phenomenon of like 0 hours contracts. I mean, in the US it must be, you know, the flexibility of having, you know, not having the being tied down by kind of permanent full-time jobs. And that really colours in, not just in the UK, but in as well continental Europe. It does colour a lot of the policy response when we're thinking about what types of steps are appropriate for governments to take in terms of regulation of labour markets and kind of regulation of power within labour markets. And I think it's because fundamentally this word flexibility is the wrong word to be using, and we should always be thinking about control, which really goes back again to who has the power to set terms in particular relationships. So flexibility, so talking about the flexibility of a female, of a woman of colour in a care job on a 0 hours contract, who isn't told when she's going to work, doesn't have the ability to actually determine when she can kind of set her work hours around care, that is called oh, but that's a flexible job. Yeah, flexible for whom? Kind of where, you know, it seems to be a language which is much better suited to thinking about the flexibility which I'm privileged enough to have as an academic, to think about when I work, what I work on while still enjoying a salaried position. So if there's one thing which really annoys me in a lot of policy debates, it's this conflation of flexibility with a lack of control. And so we should be talking about control and power more.
It's amazing what these words encode and the assumptions that they encode. Stephanie, you live in the land of euphemisms because it's not polite to talk about wealth. So your whole field is structured by polite phrases.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I was actually thinking about the phrase "the care economy," but and just thinking that it does such a disservice to something which is essentially a essential life support. You know, we talk about the Earth's life supporting systems, and you know, care work really reflects that in terms of the lives that it nurtures. But yes, in the context of private wealth, you know, I think things like risk management, you know, risk is such a comfort blanket and such a, you know, a brick wall that you can hide behind in order to mask a multitude of sins stemming from justifying investments in very extractive, you know, fossil fuel industries and so on, or the risk of being sued by future unborn beneficiaries of a trust if a decision is made, for example, to bring a trust back on shore and back within the scope of, in the UK context, the UK tax jurisdiction. And so I think risk, we really need to come out and say, well, what, you know, define risk. What are you actually meaning here? What are you hiding behind? Yeah.
That's a great one. Risk, perhaps, as a euphemism for it, giving up some money, power, control.
Absolutely.
And Maria, what about in your field? What are the development and charity sector awash in its own grammar?
Yes, first telling you that I love the question, no? And that I think is really important to look at the words that we are using, because yes, they shape the way we think. And not only in my sector, but in general, I think that when we discuss what it is possible collectively, for example, there are several words that come to mind as problematic. One is stability, no? Stability, to put stability always like a good thing, but to be stable for people who are not in comfortable places is not the best option, no? And I think the word, of course, freedom, now it is used in ways that are problematic because they don't consider collective and individual freedoms of all, no? I think as well, when we speak about empowering of women or people suffering from discrimination, sometimes that word is very lightly used because they don't, sometimes the word is not only not measured, but doesn't address the forms in which power and disempowerment are produced, no? And I think that as well, there are, if we want to create new systems, we need to create new words and new concepts, no? And very often people who try to create those new systems are as well evacuated sometimes with insults and so on. And we need to be very much attentive to how words include or exclude people and exclude what is possible, no? And what they bring as new.
Right, thank you. Now, we've spent some time in the theoretical domain talking about language, the way it creates our world. To anchor ourselves back into the here and now, policy considerations, a question from Angela Mancini on the question of additive versus relinquishing or sharing power. The answer is that both are needed. It depends on the specific sectors we are trying to change. So a question for our two policy experts is, what are those specific sectors? We're speaking about systems change, but systems change also requires very granular change, and we've heard about some of that, compensating care work, but what exactly are you pushing for right now? What does the specific sectoral or policy level change look like?
I'm hoping that I understand the question. But when I think about sectoral change, so women of color, so there's all this conversation now about job creation in the US. So women are overrepresented in the hardest hit sectors, leisure, hospitality, education, service. Those are lower wage jobs, jobs that tend to not have flexibility or benefits. And so there's a second conversation about getting women into non-traditional jobs like construction, manufacturing that pay higher wages and, you know, all this stuff. Like that's been like a thing that's been said many times over and even in the last recession. But women aren't in those jobs. Women aren't in production and manufacturing, and for good reason. There's sexual harassment, discrimination. It is still less flexible. They just have higher wages. So why don't we just make the sectors where women actually are good jobs, you know, pay, you know, raise the wages of workers, provide paid sick leave, provide, you know, work, job security, all the things we know, you know, that encompasses a good job. Why don't we make the jobs that women are actually in good jobs? So that's what I think about when I think about sectoral change, or even changing and shifting our thinking around, you know, what we think women should be doing with their time and what sectors they should be in. You know, for the care, and it's the care, you know, sector as well, lower pay, lower wage jobs. So again, transforming, you know, these sectors would go a long way, I think.
For all of the complexity of systems change, what you've sketched out, Nicole, is a stunningly clear thing that needs to happen. As you said, the jobs where women are concentrated, they need to be paid more. It's quite prescriptive. Abby, from your vantage point, what sectors are we talking about? What policy level interventions are needed?
I think there's kind of like almost like a first kind of step before we get there, which is an explicit statement that like a inclusive gender equal economy is what we're striving for. Like I agree with Nicole that discourse has shifted over the last year, but it hasn't in many countries shifted to the extent where kind of a green equitable recovery from COVID is actually the first order priority. And maybe I'm too much of an economist about this, but really being clear about your objectives, that is what's like kind of key in terms of thinking through, okay, so where is it? If we've got this amount of resources available to kind of put into particular policies in terms of thinking about regenerating the economy, where are the kind of highest return activities that we can get within a system to start kind of, targeting. That is something when I spoke at the beginning, I really wanted to highlight that actually, for example, in the UK, I don't think actually we have got an objective of having a kind of just and equitable transition from COVID. And so, like in a sense, that's what needs to happen first if we're going to start prioritizing a shift in investments by the public sector, by the kind of wider philanthropic space to kind of start valuing high social return sectors, which have like kind of historically been perhaps like kind of underinvested in.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Now, a final question for all panelists to bring us back to the theme of Systems Week 2021, bring us back to what was spoken about at the very beginning. From all of your vantage points, what is systems change? And you can take this however you want. It could be, what are you working toward? How do you understand the title of this, the title of what the Skoll Center has put on? What is systems change? Mindful of the fact that we have a lot of students who are tuning into this, trying to figure out how they should grapple with the complexity of the world, which all of us, by virtue of our age, know to be complex. But for someone who's just starting out and trying to grapple with what happens when you take a ball of a problem and start to unravel it, only to realize that there's lots of problems nestled within, what is systems change?
One of the things I found sometimes quite helpful in thinking about this, actually, especially when we start thinking about the green transition, is to think about positive feedback loops and to think about complementarities in actions. And so often for me, when I think about systems change, it's in trying to kickstart something which is self-reinforcing and builds on itself. So actually, the action that I take today is highly likely to be creating more actions, which then create kind of are bringing more people into the system, are making, if you like, the 100th person who kind of enters into this dialogue and this conversation, their actions are going to have much more benefit than, whatever I'm doing now. And so the more that we can think about where are these kind of positive reinforcing loops, where are these existence of positive externalities, complementarities in actions, the better we can think about kind of changing systems rather than just having kind of small cogs which, may fizzle out at the point at which we take our foot off the gas. And obviously, it's very difficult to think exactly what those things are, but you've got some very good examples in climate change, I think, in terms of particular types of investments in certain types of technologies, batteries, green energy, which then bring, or even if you think about the existence of, or potential existence of like climate trade clubs, all of these things, we can kind of start to understand how as soon as you kind of get them kick-started, you're kind of, you just need to get them over a particular hump, and then it'll go from there.
And indeed, you also just answered a question that we had received, which was how can we disrupt the self-reinforcing loops in our economic model? Well, to disrupt them is to initiate systems change. Let's hear from the rest of our panelists. What is systems change?
So when I think about systems change, I put it in conversation with incremental changes, which is what we see most often in policy change. And so when I think about systems change, I think about really getting to the root of a social issue or problem and understanding, again, like Abby said, the very connectedness of all of these systems and how they came into being, and understanding that they are very much entrenched, they're historical, they're racialized, they're class, like all of these things. And so these systems are really very huge. And one of the things, if I'm talking to students, I always say about systems is that we are all a part of the system. And we are all reinforcing systems every day, whether we are, we know about it or not. So what that means is that if we are all recreating these systems, we can work to create new systems and build new systems and new ways of interacting, new ways of being that are more fair, just, and equitable. And so when I think about systems here in the US, I think about the education system, the healthcare system, the social safety net system, like all of these systems, and thinking about how interconnected they all are. So that's how I think about systems change. And incremental change, frankly, we've seen what it's gotten us, which is very little, okay? In terms of addressing these really huge social problems. And so it really actually is time for really big thinking. Just one quick example that I would have or share is that the ACA in the US, American Affordable Care Act, was a big policy idea, but you put it into a broken system, a healthcare system that wasn't working. And so you got, so the policy wasn't really able to be fully realized because we plugged it into, a system that wasn't adequate or was broken or not working. And so in some instances, and when we talk about systems change, we're talking about overhauling, creating a new and imagining a new way of engaging. So.
Such a powerful example. Stephanie, Maria.
Yeah, when I think of systems change, I think about creating a vision for an ideal future in whatever system relevant system it may be. I think about looking back at the history of that particular system and identifying not if, but how that system is contributing to dysfunction and misalignment, and kind of identifying the blockers and solutions which would reverse that dysfunction, having regard to policy considerations, regulatory issues, wider political landscape. And I also think about the steps that are required in order to bring harmony where there's misalignment between the kind of present reality and the steps that actually need to be taken in order to realize that ideal future.
Brilliant, thank you. And Maria, close us out. What is systems change?
Yes, again, an excellent question. I think I see system change as addressing not pieces in isolation, not organs, but organism, no? And knowing that pieces and sectors connect with each other. And if we don't look at that broader picture, sometimes we don't reach our objectives. And that is very important as well, because we live in a world of specialists, and a specialist in the university, a specialist in the organizations where we work. And usually we have only a part of the picture. And it's very important sometimes to work together with multidisciplinarity to reach where we would like to go collectively, I can say that, for example, in the field of gender equality, women empowerment, or an access to care, there have been many projects and initiatives that have concentrated only on one aspect, access to resources or access to care or gender-based violence. And if we don't look at those together, because we don't live single lives, it's very difficult to go forward. And for example, in the issue of care, it is very important to look about how it is hands-on care is distributed across genders, across races, but we cannot look into that only looking at, for example, care work at the house. We need to look at the redistribution. We need to, with the state and public services, we need to look at the future of work and how we are organized, how it is decent work, the access to universal basic services, and all this. It can seem that take us from our initial objective, but if we don't look into all those aspects together, we are going to do incremental, perhaps, changes, but not a system change that transform the space in which all of us live and work.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughts. We are at time. For those of you who can stay on for an additional minute, we invite our live scribe and artist, Zuhura, to show visually a representation of all that we have discussed. But before we do that, one final thanks to our brilliant presenters who are creating the new world that I, for one, feel extremely humbled to be a part of and in their company. So thank you to all of you. Zuhura, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So you should be able to see my screen now. Okay, can you see that picture?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll just talk you through what I heard really quickly. So there was a lot at the beginning about how women have been way more exposed because of the pandemic, and so there's lots and lots of facts and things that I was picking up about the kind of disproportionate impact on women here. And so I'm going to tidy up that a little bit later, but the impact of COVID, it seemed to me to come down to kind of four key things which I put into this Venn diagram, which were recovery policies, disruption in existing inequalities, and care came through really strongly at that point. And so I centered care, in fact, because we talked about it so much at the beginning. So we with this figure of somebody with a baby doing washing, and I loved this idea of like personal care, economic care, and planetary care, like from a personal obligation to an economic infrastructure. So I'm going to give that a little bit more space afterwards when I tidy that up, so that's become a single kind of strong like pyramid type image. Then I also loved the like blew my mind the kind of idea of the amount of wealth transfer that's going to happen in the future, and linking this wealth transfer and the knowledge and understanding and over the next generation to this need to kind of completely change the way that we think about economic and planetary and personal care in the broadest senses. So I've got a little bit here which I need to draw the next generation in that arrow, and then this idea of power being relinquished or given was really a fantastic one for a visual metaphor. So I did power as this kind of amorphous smoky thing, which I wasn't quite sure how to draw power otherwise. And there was some very really interesting points over there which are kind of dotted around. I think I'm going to make the hand kind of look maybe more male and give it a watch and cuffs. Then I really loved what someone said, like this is this is not going to go. We can't unring this bell, stay the course. So something about momentum, I think I might make that into a little bell somehow. And then here we had, and I also really loved the language matters. What language would you ban or get rid of? So I think I captured everybody's there. So yeah, that's the overall picture, intersectional feminist economic policy down there in the left-hand corner, and then it will get tidied up and it will be shared through Saïd Business School at some point soon, next few hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely gorgeous. We will all sign off now. Reminder to everyone to visit the YouTube page for the School Center for Social Entrepreneurship. Check out the rest of the videos. Thank you, everyone.